Hey everybody, welcome back to Leosophy. This is the third episode of the Arachnology series, and I figured I'd cover ticks and mites in the same episode. And the reason being is, while ticks are interesting as a disease vector, and mites are certainly, they have tremendous effect on different economic markets, I think that there's enough of an overlap, at least physiologically, and just in terms of, I guess, public interest. I'd rather just fuse the two. Partly another reason to cover both of them in one episode is people confuse the two a lot, especially turkey mites, which are actually immature ticks. A lot of people mistake mites for ticks all the time. Thought I'd talk about that. So first, I'm going to do a brief overview of the anatomy and physiology, just to show a few of the differences. So right off the bat, let's wait for it to focus. This is a tick. And you can see the hypotoma right in front of the head. That is a serrated syringe-like instrument. And there is a reason why they have a serrated syringe-like instrument, and that is because ticks are obligate parasites. There's not a variety to their diet at all. With mites, you'll see that they have tremendous diversity in terms of what they eat. But ticks only drink blood. The only way that they're actually diverse is that some of them drink the blood of mammals, some of them drink the blood of reptiles, some of them drink the blood of invertebrates, but invertebrates have hemolymph, but you get the idea. They all drink the precious vital fluids of whatever creature they happen to parasitize. And that goes for the larvae too. The larvae have 6 legs, and they're often mistaken for insects or mites, and they're even referred to, the common name is turkey mite, but they are just juvenile, quasi-larval ticks that have not had their first blood meal yet. They will absolutely swarm a person, and it can be pretty brutal. As you can see, they have 8 legs. As you can see, they have pedipalps right out on the other side. See? Boom. Pedipalps. Theirs, just like with spiders, are sensory in nature. Actually, much more so, because, again, these are animals that prey on the blood of other living things, and so their chief means of finding the proper prey species is through detecting lots of chemical cues, including carbon dioxide in the air, and that's what those pedipalps help out with. And lastly, you can see the scutum, the shield. That's just their whole body, really. You can see the cephalothorax here, probably the smallest ratio of head cephalothorax to abdomen in the arachnid class, and then you've got this massive abdomen that is shielded by the scutum. And the reason why it has to be shielded by the scutum is because this is an animal very unique in that the amount of nourishment it needs. I've mentioned in a previous episode talking about, I think it was vampire bats, I was talking about how blood is a very not nutritious substance. It's very low in nutrients. There's trace amounts of everything, it seems, but just not a lot to go around unless you're looking at iron. And so any animal that's a sanguivore that consumes blood, just chiefly, they usually have to consume a lot of it. Vampire bats, for example, the way they get around it is by urinating a lot while they're feeding. The way ticks get around it is they have this scutum that protects their body from would-be predators or just the prey animal defending itself, but also it allows them to expand. Anybody who has seen a full tick knows exactly how much they can expand. We are talking about orders of magnitude, something to the effect of 50 or 100 times bigger than previously. There's no animal you can really compare that to. None. It's insane. It would be like a person consuming enough blood, or anything really, milkshakes, let's go with that, it's less macabre. It'd be like a person consuming gallons upon gallons of milkshakes until they were roughly the same mass as an elephant. That's how the tick physiology has accommodated this very nutrient-poor substance, which is what blood is, for the most part. It's almost mind-blowing to me, personally, how so many animals evolved to drink blood when it's just such a poor niche. I mean, I'm not criticizing evolution itself. I'm just saying why. I guess because there's plenty to go around. So yeah, ticks use those pedipalps as sensory organs to pick up on chemical cues. The reproduction is very similar in nature to the other arachnids, so I won't go too far into it because I've covered it sort of in detail with spiders and scorpions. The reason why I even mention it is because it's going to be more interesting when I talk about mites. And the most notable thing about ticks, almost certainly, for humans at least, is their role as a vector for disease. Ticks are brutal in that sense. There's Lyme disease, there's Rocky Mountain fever, there's an array of, even actually what we call Lyme disease. It's more complicated than people think. It's not just a specific pathogen that causes Lyme disease symptoms. There are proteins and viruses and bacteria and a number of things in tick saliva, especially proteins actually, that can interfere with a person's behavior, their mental function, that it is astonishing. I mean, there are legitimate mental illnesses that this is cutting edge stuff that people are actually looking into. Like, hey, what percentage of the people in this asylum were bitten by ticks? What percentage of the people in this asylum test positive for Lyme disease? Because there's so many overwhelming complications, diverse too, because of all the compounds in tick saliva and how they affect people differently. Me personally, I've been bitten by several ticks. Mosquitoes don't really go after me, but if I go in the woods, I'm going to get a tick. And on one occasion, I had a tick on me, and I removed it properly with tweezers really close to the head. That's what you do. Do not try to set it on fire while it's attached. It will vomit into your bloodstream, and then you can increase the likelihood of getting a disease. Do not squeeze on the abdomen. You will pump their saliva back into you, as well as whatever blood they've consumed, which may not just be yours. And do not use alcohol until after you've removed the tick, and try and remove the mouth parts as well. Yeah, that is a little more difficult, but that's what you try to do. Use the tweezers to get as close to the skin as possible and pull. Anyway, that's what I did. Later that day, or maybe it was the day after, I ate a grilled steak and promptly exhibited allergic symptoms. My lips swelled up, my skin sort of felt itchy and tingly. It was a very unpleasant response. I thought that I was allergic to some spice that had been put on the steak. Turns out I was allergic to beef. Because the tick saliva had put a protein in my body that is structurally similar to some of the myoproteins in beef. And the red alert that my immune system had to that saliva had taken on a similar role in response to beef. Thankfully for me, this was temporary. I think I went like 3 weeks without beef, which, again, grew up on a cattle farm, kind of difficult for me. But some people, it's permanent. There are people in this world who cannot eat beef ever because they were bitten by ticks. So again, weird symptoms can arise from ticks. They are a very strange vector for a myriad of diseases, and that's really why people are interested in them, because they cause so many problems for wildlife as well. When tick populations surge, other animal populations often decline because ticks can overwhelm animals. You got to bear in mind, we have digits. We can remove ticks with ease. A lot of animals can't, and so if they accumulate enough, especially baby animals, they will just be exsanguinated. They will be bled out from an abundance of these animals. So that's why it's really more studied than a lot of other arachnids, and that's because of their effect. Now, when people study mites, though, interestingly, it's because they often have a negative effect on economies, because mites eat lots of things, and there are lots and lots of different mites in the world. Some of them eat plants, and they can cause plant diseases. They're basically like the ticks for plants in that sense. They cause diseases to spread amongst plants that can really cause enormous agricultural damage. Additionally, there are a few mites that are parasitic. The most notable that you would be familiar with would probably be scabies and its canine cousin mange. So whenever people talk about demodectic mange, they're talking about the Demodex mite, which embeds itself in the skin and feeds off of sugars in the blood. and it causes animals' hairs to fall out, and they usually look horrible, and they itch, and they're in pain. And so mange and scabies that's where they come from. They come from a kind of parasitic mite. Let me show the chief difference between, again, you'll see a lot of commonality between a tick and a mite. Instead of a scutum, you've got an opisthonoidal shield. It's kind of funny. I can pronounce words when I'm not reading them, like looking at them, but then when I read them, like all of a sudden it's harder. And then there's also the podonodal shield. Now, the reason why they have that name is that podonodal, you can see the root word there with leg, because it's the segment of the abdomen. Now, it's not a true segment. It just kind of has a notable division. And then the opisthonoidal is, terminal to that. And interestingly enough, what is labeled horn, those are actually just scleridizations. Mites are hairy. That's something to note, because ticks very rarely have any kind of hair on their bodies, and if they do, it's very sparse, whereas mites generally are just fuzzy as all get out. And the horns, I think, these scleridizations, I think the chief reason why they have them is it sort of breaks up the pattern of the hair, and it makes it harder to determine where the weak point of the mite is. So you're more likely, a predator would be more likely to attack the abdomen rather than the head. And you can see how that could be advantageous. That's just a theory on my part. Again, like with all arachnids, 8 legs, and like all arachnids, chelicerae and palps. And unlike the ticks, for whom the chelicerae evolved into that rasped dagger-like organ that kind of reminds me of true bugs, the rostrum, mites actually have a similar proboscis-like mouth part, again, that evolved from chelicerae, though it is chelicerae, but it doesn't have that rasp-like terminal end, and instead it's used to drain. Again, you can see how evolution follows clear patterns. True bugs, a lot of them, they either drain the lifeblood from other animals, like the assassin bug, like a tick in that sense, so the mouth parts kind of overlap. Well, similarly, herbivorous true bugs, like aphids, have mouth parts that are very similar in structure to mites, as you could see. So, mites actually feed on a variety of things, and yes, some of them are parasitic, some of them are predatory. Most of them, though, are herbivorous, and it has just a really interesting effect because they are a vector for a variety of plants, many of which we grow for economic reasons and culinary reasons, and so it can have an effect. That being said, I think mites are probably more maligned than any of the other arachnids, which is funny because people don't really say a lot of mean things about mites, but the reason why I'm going with that is because most of these crops are things like coconut palms and just things that I understand, like why you would have an incentive to want to get rid of them, but with the exception of scabies and mange, they're not really much of a pest animal. I almost said species. I don't even know how many species there are. In fact, I would actually be scared to venture a guess, given that tomorrow somebody might discover 3 more, because that's the other most notable thing. Mite is often used as a synonym for something being small. Well, it's because they are. Mites are extremely tiny compared to ticks. That's one of the other reasons why the larvae get confused with mites, because mites are teeny tiny. Common misconception, a lot of people think that chiggers are blood drinkers. They are not. They actually consume skin. So what they do is they actually dig a little bit under the skin, and then they use their saliva to dissolve bits of the skin, and then they leave. So they don't actually drink your blood. They are incredibly itchy, though. I've only had them once, and boy, was it maddening. Like, I would rather have 3 tick bites or a dozen mosquito bites to chiggers. Man, it was rough. One last thing, I'll just talk about their reproduction. By the way, ticks lay eggs. That probably goes without saying since I mentioned that scorpions are unique, but ticks do lay eggs, and females need a lot of blood in order to have enough nutrients to lay eggs. And a lot of times when you get bit by a tick, it's kind of like with mosquitoes. They're looking for a blood meal for their eggs, and they lay a lot of eggs. But back to mites. The interesting thing about mites, which, they can lay eggs, and some of them are viviparous and oviviparous, but anyway, the interesting thing, the reason why I even wanted to talk about mites' reproduction earlier, this is so weird. arachnid reproduction, as I mentioned before, is kind of like patty cake. The males have a specialized organ that they put sperm on, and then they inseminate the female. Mites are very unusual because they evolved, like other chelicerates, to have a system like that, sort of a non-regular sex kind of system. And then, they're the only animal probably that did this. They just evolved in a completely different direction, more like every other animal, like mammals and birds and reptiles. The males actually evolved a penis, a chitinous one, so it's not like, it's not like your regular setup, but they evolved that, and then that's how they reproduce. Normal penetrative act. Man, this video is gonna get flagged just because of those words. But yeah, isn't that weird? Like, what blows my mind about it is because they evolved to reproduce like ordinary arachnids in fossil records, and then they evolved to reproduce more like mammals later on. It just blows my mind. It's a strange thing, and it's very unique for arachnids. So yeah, that covers mite and tick physiology and anatomy and behavior. So like, share, subscribe, keep asking questions. I think next episode I'm going to cover harvestmen, but I'm not sure. Bye.